welcome to this digital program presented by the CSIS Energy Security and Climate Change Program. My name is Joseph Micah, and I'm the director of our program here at CSIS. It's my job to welcome you today to what I hope will be a really interesting, potentially provocative, and dynamic conversation about the future of hydrogen and low emissions hydrogen production in the United States. In the wake of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the U.S. is making substantial investments in low emissions hydrogen. And we know that low emissions hydrogen is an important part of a net zero energy system. I have to admit, we don't know exactly how much we need. We don't know exactly when we will need it. But if we cast to ourselves to the mid-century, we're relatively confident that an energy carrier in fluid form that will allow us to use its fluid properties in a net zero system will be important. Could be for steel, could be for energy storage at the seasonal scale for the power sector. We're not quite sure. There's a lot of uncertainty to unpack here. But at the same time, there's a lot of uncertainty in how we're going to even build this industry. We've already done programming here at CSIS on the considerations for tax credits for hydrogen production from electrolysis, some might say green hydrogen. And in this conversation, we're going to take a look at what the outlook is for hydrogen from natural gas feedstocks. How low emissions can that feedstock get? And the big question we want to ask is this a place where the US can take a lead in developing a strategic low carbon energy resource? And will the US be able to leverage its natural resources to contribute to the growth of a low carbon hydrogen industry, which will help meet our climate and our energy goals? We've got three experts here to help us navigate this conversation and understand the considerations that are going into how the tax credits and the various policy supports that we have for low carbon energy might apply in this context. A couple things I'm watching for in this conversation. Which incentives offer the best bang for buck? Is it carbon capture? Is it the production of low emissions hydrogen? How should we think about those two? How low can emissions from of a hydrogen production get when you're using fossil fuel feedstocks? How do we define life cycle emissions appropriately? And lastly, one of the things I'm most curious to hear is, how do the considerations that go into electrolytic hydrogen? How clean is the energy you're using? How clean is the full supply chain? How do those carry over? And how are they different in this context? We've got three experts who've looked at this issue from the intellectual and from the commercial side. And I'm just very excited that they're joining us today. There is an open Q&A box for those of you who are joining us live. You are welcome to submit questions. And our moderator, Jane Nakano, and our staff here at CSIS will curate and feed those to the speakers at the end of the program. With that, I would like to introduce my colleague, Jane Nakano, Senior Fellow here at CSIS in the Energy Program, to moderate today's discussion. Thank you so much for joining us, and over to you, Jane.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Good morning, everyone. It's really great to have this excellent speakers to really help us unpack more about all the opportunities and things that we haven't really, figured out about, the future outlook for natural gas-based carbon captured hydrogen. It's an exciting time, but there's still a lot of questions. And, without further ado, let me introduce the first speaker, who is Aaron Bergman, who is the fellow with the Resources for the Future. I'm going to be inviting each speaker to give about 5 to 7 minutes of sort of a opening, round of opening remarks. So, Aaron, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to use a couple slides here to sort of set the stage and talk about what are the incentives available for fossil fuel-based hydrogen. And if I can go to the next slide here, that would be great. Sorry. There we go. So I think, the big one that there's been a lot of talk about is what we call the 45V tax credit for hydrogen production. And this is a new tax credit that was put in the Inflation Reduction Act. And you might be aware that there's been just a huge conversation about this for hydrogen from electrolysis. So we're going to talk about it today in sort of the context of fossil fuel hydrogen. And I think a big difference between electrolytic hydrogen and fossil fuel hydrogen is that you can also take advantage of the 45Q tax credit. So this is a tax credit that's been around for a while. It's for carbon oxide sequestration, putting the carbon dioxide in the ground, and its value was significantly increased under the Inflation Reduction Act. So just to give a couple details about the two different tax credits, for the 45Q, you get $85 per metric ton of carbon oxide that's geologically sequestered. And you'll notice I've been saying carbon oxide here rather than carbon dioxide. The Act actually says carbon oxide, so you could do carbon monoxide rather than carbon dioxide. I'm not sure it would make sense. I'd be curious, but that is what the Act says. If you instead decide to use the carbon dioxide for, say, example, enhanced oil recovery, that value is reduced to about $60 per ton. So I think it's sort of helpful to translate this into a value of sort of subsidy per kilogram of hydrogen. And if you sort of look at a steam methane reformer with a water gas shift reaction and about 95% capture of the hydrogen, it translates to about 80 cents kilogram of hydrogen, though that value could vary depending on sort of the parameters of the plant. You know, on the other side, we have the 45V tax credit, which is really a tax credit specifically for the production of hydrogen. And it's sort of really unique and interesting in that the value depends on what they call the well-to-gate life cycle emissions from the hydrogen. And this phrase well-to-gate appears in the Inflation Reduction Act, but is not precisely defined there. And so that is one of the things that's led to a problem. But I just included a table here, and you can see that sort of that from this high level, you can be as low as 60 cents. If you can get below 0.45 kilograms of CO2 equivalent before kilogram of hydrogen, you get to up to $3. The 45V tax credit also has the option that you can take it as an investment tax credit. So instead of getting money for every kilogram of hydrogen you produced, you get some percentage of your capital expenses. And so the translated ITC percentages are here. The 45Q tax credit is you get it for about 12 years, 45V about 10 years. Both of them, construction has to start, I believe, by the end of by the end of 2032. There are some apprenticeship and wage requirements. These values get divided by 5 if you don't meet them. We can talk more about those. And they also have direct pay for anybody for the first 5 years of the tax credit, and they can be transferable thereafter. So I want to dig a little bit more into sort of the life cycle emissions of what that could mean for various forms of hydrogen production. And I apologize for my bad artwork here, but sort of the ovals here are the different feedstocks that would go into hydrogen production from fossil fuels. And then the sort of rounded rectangles are the different forms that you could create hydrogen. I included pyrolysis here, even though it hasn't been deployed, but it is sort of interesting as a potential technology that could produce hydrogen from methane without releasing any carbon dioxide. But the main technology really here is reforming, steam methane reforming or autothermal reforming, but I also included coal gasification here. And each of these has direct CO2 emissions. You know, as you do the SMR, the gasification, they will release CO2 into the atmosphere unless you capture it. But if you look at the feedstocks, each of those also has emissions associated with that. For the natural gas feedstock, there will be leakages in the production and the transportation of natural gas. There'll be methane leakage. In coal production, there's coal bed methane. All of these also use electricity. That is a feedstock. And in the production of electricity, you will burn fossil fuels potentially. That will release carbon dioxide. And as you burn coal or natural gas there's also methane leakage from those. So all of these things, the methane, all this upstream methane and carbon dioxide from your feedstocks, in addition to the direct emissions, are counted as part of this life cycle calculation. I also included two things in the lower right here. Water is used, like if you look at sort of Argonne's model, they don't associate any emissions with the consumption of water, but I could imagine situations where that might be an issue. Also, hydrogen is what's called an indirect greenhouse gas. It doesn't actually directly affect the greenhouse gas effect, but it affects the concentration of other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So any hydrogen leakage may also eventually turn to be part of a life cycle calculation. So I wanted to just sort of provide some, potential quantifications of what the magnitude of these different emissions could be. And, there's a lot of assumptions embedded here about methane leakage rates, what is sort of the grid emissions and just the configurations of the plant. So, I wouldn't take sort of the detailed numbers seriously, but it's sort of a good idea of the relative magnitude. So each of these sort of vertical red bars delineates the different tiers of the 45V tax credit, going from 0.45 at the lowest all the way up to 4, after which you don't receive the tax credit. And just sort of focusing on steam methane reforming, if you do about 95% capture, your direct emissions can get you down to that 0.45. But then you still have substantial electricity emissions, and then even more the methane leakage upstream. This is using the 100-year global warming potential, is substantial enough that that gets you all the way up into the the 60-cent range. And similarly for autothermal reforming with about 95% capture, the direct emissions are not the most significant component. It is really the upstream electricity and the upstream natural gas leakage that matter. And then for coal gasification, this is a coal gas fire with 90% capture. The direct emissions are quite high, and then the coal bed methane will push you up very far higher. So if you remember what I said earlier, that if you about 75-80 cents is the value of the CCS, sort of the 45Q tax credit. So I think the lesson here is that the 45Q tax credit can be higher in certain situations than the 45E tax credit. It also has the advantage of being much simpler. You just look at how much CO2 you put into the ground, you count it, you multiply it by 85, and you call it a day. For these life cycle analysis, Treasury is going to have to develop guidance, not just for how you measure this, but let's say you want to take advantage of low leakage natural gas. How would you demonstrate that? So this is something Treasury will have to tell us. And furthermore, these upstream electricity emissions here, these are valued at the average intensity of the grid. Similar to electrolytic hydrogen, you might want to take advantage of saying that you're using clean power. And if you've been paying attention to that debate, it seems that likely that the guidance for the use of clean electricity may end up to be rather complex. So with that, I will stop and I guess turn it back over to Jane. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Aaron. That was a fantastic overview. And I think you're being very modest about your schematics. I mean, there's so many different elements that that go into different segments of the hydrogen production supply chain. I actually thought was very helpful, way to be able to visualize. And but we'll definitely be coming back to some of the specific elements of what you just shared with us. But without further ado, let me introduce Alex Dewar, who is the managing director and partner at the Boston Consulting Group. And it'd be great to hear from you, Alex. A little more about what makes this the natural gas-based hydrogen to be potentially its solution, which is the use of CCUS, the carbon capture sequestrations portion of this ecosystem, if you will. If you can help us unpack more about what are some of the opportunities, what are some of the things that we're still trying to figure out, that would be fantastic. The floor is yours, Alex.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jane, and everybody at the CSIS team for organizing this session. I think, as Joe said at the outset, there's rightfully a lot of focus on electrolytic hydrogen, but this question of natural gas or other hydrocarbon with CCS driven hydrogen, so-called blue hydrogen, is an absolutely critical one. And as I'll get into today, we see it as a real material opportunity to scale up the production and emerging uses of low carbon hydrogen going forward. And exactly as you said, Jane, we don't have low carbon fossil derived hydrogen without CCS. So let me just frame a little bit of our thinking here for the role of CCS, how it's being deployed, and how we think it really will enable the rollout and evolution of low carbon hydrogen use in the US. So I think the starting point is fundamentally, as Aaron laid out, from an emissions intensity perspective. And the reality is that CCS is the majority component here, the most important decarbonization lever to derive a low carbon hydrogen molecule from any fossil sources. As Aaron said, of course, there are other drivers, upstream methane emissions intensity, the electricity that's used in hydrogen production. But at the end of the day, CCS will account for something in the order of 70 to 80% of the emissions reduction from the conventional gray hydrogen production that we see today. Fortunately, though, when we're talking about CCS use with low carbon hydrogen, this is a relatively mature and scalable technology versus others that we're looking at. The starting point for low carbon hydrogen often is described as the existing uses and sources of production of hydrogen today, the gray hydrogen supply or value chains that we currently see. And there, CCS offers a relatively, again, mature and scalable model to a set of technologies to decarbonize that existing hydrogen production. The vast majority of hydrogen production in the US is through steam methane reforming. And there, as Aaron alluded to, there's really a couple streams where CCS can be applied. First, you have a high concentration process stream. And really, this is, you're dealing with a relatively low cost means of carbon capture in that application. Something typically in the order of $30 to $50 potentially plus per ton of CO2. That gets you about 50 or 60% of the way there. The other side of the equation, though, is your lower concentration combustion-oriented emissions, those that are needed to really the fuel that's consumed to produce the steam in the steam methane reforming process. That is a more challenging technology to be deployed. We've seen less deployment of lower concentration carbon capture today, but has been demonstrated in multiple instances, and we believe is more in the order of somewhere in the $50 to $70, potentially $80 per ton range. It varies asset by asset, of course. The point being, though, that there's really two applications of carbon capture and a way to partially and then more fully decarbonize existing steam methane reforming. And that's really important because we produce in the US about 10 million tons of hydrogen today, gray hydrogen that is unabated. And so by rolling out CCS across applications like ammonia, hydrogen production and use and refining, and for other value chains like specialty chemicals, that provides a very relatively quick win and easier path toward the deployment of low carbon hydrogen. Beyond that, of course, we have opportunities with the greenfield development of autothermal reforming capacity. This is a different technology, one that effectively has CCS built in, where you don't have to retrofit, but is larger scale, more technically complex, and will require further deployment. Regardless, though, I think the point for this conversation today is there are multiple pathways, even beyond what I just described as the two leading ones, to deploy CCS with low carbon hydrogen and to start relatively quickly with a relatively mature set of technologies and scale from there. Beyond that, I think it's another really important context for the US here is the broader deployment and scaling of CCS related infrastructure. Outside of just the low carbon hydrogen space, of course, the US has 45Q, the tax credit that is and will drive greater adoption of carbon capture across a wider range of industrial applications. We also have further fiscal support through the bipartisan infrastructure bill and pre-existing fiscal support for the deployment of CCS-related infrastructure in terms of pore space for CO2 storage, of pipelines, and so forth. And so given the US is already the leading country globally for carbon capture, and in many ways we have some of the most attractive incentives around CCS overall, that provides really additional means of support here and enablement. Because when we're thinking about CCS, really we're thinking about localized infrastructure, the need for pipelines and the need for CO2 storage. And with that comes economies of scale and comes network effects from building infrastructure. The more you build, the lower you drive down costs, again, achieving those economies of scale and also making it easier for newer sources of carbon capture to join the existing networks. And so I think that's a really important element for us to think about, again, as we conceive of how low carbon hydrogen will scale around the country. We have regions where CCS networks are already in place, notably along the Gulf Coast, in Wyoming, in the Permian, other pockets around the US as well. And we have further hubs planned, especially in the Gulf Coast, the Midwest, Great Plains, Great Lakes regions. And so here we see real significant synergies between low carbon hydrogen deployment and broader CCS deployment in the US. And for us, this in sum is going to be a really material way to move hydrogen forward, that Of course, again, nothing against electrolytic or green hydrogen in any way. Our view is they're highly complementary, but a kind of blue hydrogen or fossil plus CCS derived hydrogen route does provide that relatively quickly and more scalable path forward, on our journey to seeing much larger scale low carbon hydrogen deployment.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was really great. Not just the sort of overview, but some of the thoughts that have been going into this whole discussion about, I guess the pace of deployment. International Energy Agency has, I don't know. I guess it's estimate under their 1.5 degree emissions reductions scenario that I think we need about 4,000 tons of carbon capture capacity, and to get there, I think it requires both renewable based and also hydrogen, the hydrocarbon based, so long as we can really make sure that the net benefit exists for global climate mitigation. Thank you so much. Next, let me go to Matt Reeves. He's the New Products and Strategy Integration Manager at Exxon Mobil. The conversation like this, I think, really would not have been complete if we couldn't really bring in the commercial perspective. What the United States is looking at is the opportunity to have low carbon and hydrogen potential, but not as some government enterprise. I mean, obviously, the government is, playing a very, important, strong role, trying to incentivize. But, at the end of the day, our economy, thrives the most when private companies can really make the business case and can really bring values to the customers and consumers. So I'm really excited to really be able to hear from you. What are some of the considerations as the project developer when you look at this whole, well, I shouldn't say whole menu, but basically 45V versus 45Q. But what are some of the considerations that go into as you try to make a business case and really, and help create this hydrogen economy within the United States? It's yours. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thanks so much, Jane. Appreciate the introduction, and thank you for CSIS for hosting this and for the opportunity to engage in this discussion. And a lot of what we'll talk about is what Aaron and Alex have talked about, but we'll take it from a little bit different perspective. The overarching message with respect to hydrogen policy that we want to talk for and advocate for is the need for consistent, transparent value of carbon that is technology neutral when done on a life cycle assessment basis. So that's our main message. And most of the other points kind of derive from that. But just to talk a little bit about this, what is tech neutrality and why is it important? So first of all, what is tech neutrality with respect to hydrogen? It basically means policy that allows all hydrogen sources to compete on a level playing field just based on carbon intensity. Okay, so but why is that so important? It's important because it produces the maximum GHG reduction for the lowest cost to society. Our history as a society of predicting the future when it comes to energy is not very good. But our industry's ability to innovate when presented with a clearly defined, but not overly constrained problem actually is very good. So that's our goal here, is to find the problem, let industry and others work together to help overcome that problem. So tech neutrality is the key to that. This is one reason we tend to downplay the color wheel of hydrogen. I know we've talked about or avoided talking about green and blue, but at the CSIS event a few weeks ago, there was a discussion on green hydrogen and the impact of the power supply has on carbon intensity of the CI of hydrogen from electrolyzers. That's really important. There's a range of carbon intensities that can be derived from electrolyzers or green hydrogen. It's the same thing for blue hydrogen or hydrogen from natural gas. The range of carbon intensity can be very wide, as Aaron pointed out in his graph as well. One of the most important elements of carbon intensity of blue hydrogen, as Aaron did point out, is the feedstock carbon intensity. And namely, we're talking about natural gas. So natural gas, primarily methane, it doesn't inherently have a high GHG footprint. The concerns are that natural gas are the potential emissions associated with the production of it and then the use of it. GHG emissions with natural gas, they come from the production, processing, and transportation, as well as from the combustion of the product. Those are the two sources of emissions. On the production, processing, and transportation side, there can be GHG emissions from methane leakage, and then as well as from CO2 generated from the supplying energy to support these processes. But if methane emissions are mitigated through the well to gate supply chain steps, and steps are taken to decarbonize the energy associated with that production to mitigate that CO2, then we think that those should be recognized in policy and in representation as that lower carbon intensity. The natural gas itself, not all natural gas is produced the same. So when steps are taken to decarbonize both the methane emission leaks as well as the CO2 emissions associated with the energy, we would want those recognized. So recognition of these improvement steps in policy can also help drive a faster decarbonization in the natural gas sector, and can help be a spur to that. The other potential source of emissions from natural gas is the combustion or the reaction of it producing CO2. And in this case, a high CCUS or carbon capture and storage rate is important to mitigate those emissions. It's now possible in the design of hydrogen plants, particularly ATRs that we've been looking at, to increase, to go above 98% carbon capture rate. And doing this significantly mitigates emissions from combustion. So we really advocate and want to help garner consensus for recognition of lower carbon intensity natural gas, the potential for lower carbon power inputs, and then also lower carbon facility designs or carbon capture rates, all with the proper monitoring and verification in place. So it's really the tech neutrality. And then very briefly on why is the life cycle assessment so important? Because if it's not done right, steps that appear positive on a smaller scale may actually be negative when looked at through a broader lens. Just a very obvious example would be if you use gray hydrogen to replace natural gas as a fuel, it might look like a positive step in a smaller box because it's a direct fuel replacement. But when looked at through an LCA, this would be recognized as an overall negative GHG step. So the IRA and 45V specifically have these elements. The production tax credits apply based on the carbon intensity of the hydrogen produced, regardless of technology. And the carbon intensity is measured on a well-to-gate life cycle assessment. What we're really seeking in this, in the rulemaking phase, which is where we are now, is the clarity, robustness, and consistency in application of this legislative intent. And investors, we need the confidence in the durability of the tax credit. And we believe it's important that policy designed to achieve these maximum GHG reductions, whether green or blue or any of the other colors, really just based on its carbon intensity. All right, thank you, Jane.
Fantastic, thank you so much, Matt. It actually, I have a lot of really questions that I'd love to come back to because you do have the Baytown project that you're working on, and I think there are probably a lot of things that you're, I don't know if experimenting is the right word, but a lot of things that you're, finding out as you're, working on that the massive project. But let me now shift a gear a little bit and have conversation with all three speakers. By the way, for those of you that have tuned in, please feel free to start sending in your questions. My colleagues are collecting them and they will be sharing them with me. But it's never too late to start thinking and submitting them. But let me start with Aaron, if I may. So, about a little more about the, I guess, hydrogen production cost, if I may. So, under the 45V and 45Q, there are, different, incentives, so different ways that the incentives are structured, right? So, but what are some of the trade-offs between, the choosing one over the other in the context of, how they might affect the cost of hydrogen production itself?
So I think, one of the major advantages of the 45Q tax credit is its simplicity. You don't have to worry about what is life cycle analysis mean. You don't have to worry about how you can leak it from your natural gases or your carbon intensity of your electricity. You just take your CO2, you put it in the ground, and you sort of count it up. So, that is just makes life a lot easier in many ways. For the 45V tax credit, there is the option to get higher values. As I said, I estimated sort of 70 to 80 cents, for what the value of the 45Q is per kilogram of hydrogen. If you can get down to those higher tiers of the 45V tax credit, you will be getting more money. And it's just going to be a question in my mind. Treasury will have to start releasing the guidance and sort of what will the level of burden be, to demonstrate sort of these lower emissions rate or the consumption of low carbon electricity. I think Treasury is not maybe the department that you would think of to be doing verification of methane. And my guess is, EPA should be issuing some rules on sort of methane measurement for the greenhouse gas reporting program. There's a methane fee in the Inflation Reduction Act. So I suspect Treasury will likely lean on that EPA guidance, but we'll have to see when the guidance for the 45V rules come out.
Yeah, it's, I think I think a lot of us are waiting for the guidance to come out, and for that reason, I'm actually excited the number of people that have tuned in to watch us talk about this issue. We have several hundred people tuning in. It's in the United States, the 4th of July sort of holiday week, but it really reflects the level of anticipation, but then also the roles that these guidances play. They really affect a number of different things at different segments of the value chain. Now, let me turn to Alex, and maybe before we get to some of the sort of bigger picture sort of regulations, if I may, a little bit about the emissions question. I think some of you, and I think including you, Alex, talked about the global warming potential. There are a lot of conversations about how to understand the time frame associated with the effects of emissions on the planet, and like the 20-year global warming potential time frame versus 100, for example. I just wanted to get a little more sense from you as to how these the time frames like how why. I guess, what are the key differences using one over the other, and how do we, those of us that really do not have the scientific background, better appreciate, what's at stake, if you will.
Yeah, it's a great question, Jane, and I think it's one that is unfortunately politicized at times because the scientific reality is that we're dealing with different greenhouse gases here, and any life cycle analysis will combine a view of the CO2 intensity along with the methane emissions intensity. But as we know, CO2 and methane have different impacts in terms of the global warming potential. And the fact is that methane is a shorter-lived but more impactful greenhouse gas than CO2. It's also one that we just frankly have less experience, and there is less sort of infrastructure in a way around reporting on, measuring, and really comparing on an apples to apples basis with others. And so I think what we found is some studies may be very selective, I guess, let's say, in terms of a 100-year versus a 20-year to really show different impacts of methane emissions intensity. My personal view to throw in the room today is I think it's important to look at both. The reality is that driving down methane emissions intensity through supply chains can be one of the easier, more cost-effective ways to reduce the GHG intensity of low carbon hydrogen. And so at the end of the day, if the methane emissions intensity is minimized overall, that will actually have a relatively low impact on the full life cycle emissions intensity. It mostly will be focused on CO2 emissions, either at the point of hydrogen production, where, as I said, CCS is critical, or in terms of the grid and whether full renewables, or any fossil, natural gas-based power is supplied there as well. So I think the short answer to it is both are relevant to look at. And what that speaks to is that we really ought to be looking at methane emissions and carbon CO2 emissions separately and independently to provide, I think, each their own kind of share of the pie here, and recognition that we're dealing with two actually quite different greenhouse gases.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your comment, and in your view, I mean, each has its own, unique attributes, and being able to, I think that's a really, important thing for many of us to, remember.
Can I add something to that?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, and I think everything Alex says is right from the scientific point of view. I think from the regulatory point of view, I don't think Treasury has the choice to take both into account. It does have to be combined into one sort of greenhouse gas equivalent number. And so they will have to choose the 20-year or the 100-year. My suspicion is that they would go with the 100-year, but unfortunately, the science is very complex, and the regulatory policies do have to distill it down into a single number.
That's actually really, yes, yeah, another good reminder. I don't know if Matt has his own number that he needs to, he wants to jump in and share with the audience. Feel free.
I have no independent view. It's just we need clarity and consistency is the one. We don't need it to change after 5 years. So we need to have a number align on that. It's scientific based, transparent, and consistent.
Sounds great. So let me come to you, Matt, now. So, we talked a bit about incentives already this morning, but other than the tax, things like tax credits, what are some of the other elements that would be key for cleaner hydrogen, or even hubs programs, such as off-taker, off-takes? I mean, there's a couple key elements, but from you and your company's view, what are some of the really immediate key important elements, and perhaps even mid to longer term, and are they significantly different? I love your view.
No, thanks. I think it's as we've talked about, the IRA is very important, but what it does is it helps drive down the cost to get started. It's a great start, but it's a means to an end, not the end itself, right? I mean, this is a 10-year tax policy, tax support that's offered to help drive the cost down to initiate this. Eventually, for this to all work, we have to move toward a market-based solution. Our projects, even would be 20, 25 plus years. So tax support or tax policy would only exist for a portion of that. So we have to drive toward, market-based solutions, and that means people value carbon. They value decarbonized energy and decarbonized products more than is valued. The incumbents are valued. So creating that marketplace where there's value in there is what's really necessary to make this work in the longer term. There's other regulatory framework that needs to be clarified. Also, I think maybe Alex mentioned on some of the CCS and other things like that. So clarity around that allows us to be able to have confidence when we design a project that we can go forward with it. So we need that. The policy clarity is important, but ultimately this needs to be a market-based solution, and so the market needs to value it either by market-led direction or by voluntary space. And I guess the DOE recognized that with the issuance yesterday of the market-based fund, which we're all trying to understand a little more about, but it at least is addressing one of the key needs, or moving toward in that direction of addressing one of the needs of creating a demand for the low carbon hydrogen product.
Yeah, and Matt, and for the next round, I'd love to come back to the little more about regulations and market conditions. So that was actually really timely point that you made. But let me go back to Aaron first. Just I'm just trying to keep the order, and so that everyone feels involved. So going back to the more of the text of some of these provisions, IRA provisions. let me just for a moment focus on 45V. So the interpretation of the 45V emissions accounting guideline language, could be different. Like when, if you think about them, under the electrolyte hydrogen versus, hydrocarbon-based, carbon captured. So I wanted to just, get your thought of, what are some of the key ways that they could be understood differently? Or I don't know if that's really the fair way to even word the question, but certainly it's, the two technology-based approaches are quite, different. Each has, its own unique characteristics. So if you can walk the audience through the ways in which the, different interpretations, can exist, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think, ultimately Treasury will have to sort of come up with a consistent set of guidance sort of based on the feedstocks, but the feedstocks themselves are very different. Natural gas is really something that flows in a pipeline. The molecules are moving, you can sort of look backwards, see where your natural gas came from, attempt to quantify the leakage. I mean, there are challenges, super emitters and things like that, but, sort of trying to understand sort of the life cycle where your natural gas comes from is more straightforward than electricity. And electricity is a challenge because, we talk a lot about electricity flows and things like that, but, the electrons are really just going back and forth in the alternating current. So nobody is really, unless you have a direct line connecting like a wind farm to your electrolyzer or whatever, you're not consuming clean electricity. You're really consuming electric power off of the grid. And, for for the fossil fuel-based hydrogen, as you saw on the chart, it is a significant amount, and it would be, I think, valuable to lower that number. For electrolytic hydrogen, it is the whole ball game. You use a lot of electricity to create hydrogen, and so they need a way to demonstrate that they are using electricity that is lower than the carbon intensity of the grid, or they wouldn't be able to qualify for any tier of the tax credit. And so this gets into this concept of buying energy attribute credits, I believe is the term they call them now, EECs, or what used to be called RECs, or renewable electricity credits, which are sort of widely used, but we want to broaden it to go beyond renewables. And so if you can purchase this additional sort of attribute, that is sort of said to demonstrate that you are consuming clean power rather than grid electricity. However, because this is in some ways a bit of an accounting fiction, it's hard to draw a connection between the sort of the purchase of this credit and the actual amount of clean electricity, so the amount of emissions reduction you've done. And this is what's led to a lot of sort of the debate over how you really do it, including sort of what some people call the three-pillar approach, which means, this could get really in the weeds, but there's a lot of very sort of complicated matching requirements on hourly and deliverability that people have requested. Other people have requested more loose requirements that maybe you can have a year to use an individual rec. So it gets very messy very quickly, but it is sort of the most important thing for the electrolytic hydrogen. But I do think understanding what those rules and the costs associated will be important, because the electricity consumption in fossil fuel hydrogen is a significant component of the life cycle emissions as well.
Thank you, Aaron. So Alex, if we can talk then now about a little more about regulations, but then also some of the I guess the role of the government to some extent. So how can the government agencies and regulatory bodies help facilitate the CCUS deployment? Because as you and I very much sort of agree on, I mean, it's a really key component of for to enable the cleaner low carbon hydrocarbon based hydrogen production. So here I'm thinking so about what are current regulatory barriers, or even not, it doesn't have to be overly sort of negatives like barriers, but what are some of the things that you think are necessary for CCUS deployment to speed up, and I guess similarly, what's the role of the private sector? Because again, this isn't meant to be forever, some sort of a government, exercise, right? So how could what are some of the roles that the private sector could be playing to complement this effort? Let me start. Let me stop there and invite you for your comment. Thanks.
Yeah, so I would say that there's really steps that both government and speaking both about the federal government as well as state and local governments can play, as well as the private sector at each step of the CCS value chain here. I think in capture, of course, this is where further demonstration and scaling of the capture technologies, as well as the wider range of low carbon hydrogen based production technologies like autothermal reforming is needed. Fortunately, within the infrastructure bill, within the IRA and through multiple other mechanisms, there is much greater funding now available to really demonstrate that. It's been done in different instances before, but more is needed, especially to work through some of the technical challenges and complexities with that. And I think that's a real natural case for a combined, public-private approach on this, where government through different mechanisms can help to buy down the cost on this to reduce the risk. But private sector must share in that risk, especially if they want to see returns on low carbon hydrogen supply going forward. I think when you look at the transport and storage side of CCS, CO2 pipelines and subsurface storage in saline aquifers or depleted oil and gas reservoirs, that's really where the challenges are much more of a permitting and regulatory nature. We are dealing with a very new type of infrastructure here, and there's a lack of regulatory clarity. And in the US, we, of course, have a highly complex and overlapping set of governance and in the various state to state or even across local jurisdictions. And so here, I think it's actually probably more the role of individual states and local other local jurisdictions in terms of how CO2 pipelines are sited and permitted, how pore space for CO2 storage is unlocked, how liability is managed. It's those types of efforts, as well as, of course, the permitting, EPA Class 6 wells, offshore, or federal lands permitting as well. It's those types of issues actually that are really going to be potentially some of the bottlenecks here and where we need to see further progress.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex. So Matt, I'd love to hear from hear your view as well on similarly on the role of regulations, also market conditions. Certainly, it could please feel free to touch upon some of the things like CCUS element, but then overall, since you are, project, developer, from the overall sort of value chains associated with the production of the low carbon hydrogen, what are what sort of specific clarities, but then also perhaps barriers, you would like to have mitigated. And it could be specific to the Baytown project or any similar initiatives that you have.
Well, I think we've hit on a lot of these already, but I think the clarity around the rules, and we're in the rulemaking phase on the IRA now. So generating that clarity, we want to take risk associated with, can we develop the project that we said that we were going to develop? Not is the policy going to be consistent throughout the duration of this. So we need clarity and confidence and consistency of application of policy, of the regulatory space where it comes to permitting, things like that. So those are ones that are needed for many projects. The ones that's more unique associated with this is the tax policy confidence and clarity that's needed to help support that. I will say also, we have, we learned a lot through developing these projects. In the Baytown project, we've released the feed in this, and we've gone through technology selection. We've also have 3 CCS projects that we've FID'd, where we're taking the CO2 from other parties and we'll sequester that. Going through those actual projects is a big learning experience. It's not just a technology learning experience. It's how do you actually make these projects work? right? How do you set up contracts? How do you address risk? Those kind of things. So there's a lot of learnings associated with actually doing it, just as we have in the Baytown project. If we've gone through the design all the way into feed, now we've learned a lot relative to where we started. So actually doing these projects, you gain a much greater perspective versus kind of maybe the pre-design, pre-execution type of looks at these. It's just the learning cycles that are associated with doing. So we've learned a lot through the actual activities of doing these.
Thank you. We're starting to get some really interesting questions come in. I do still have some questions, but let me actually share some of the audience questions with you. And I think it has a lot to do with the little things that we noticed come out yesterday. Obviously, it was a pretty big deal. The DOE is now asking for public input on how to generate or create the hydrogen market. What are some of the designs or considerations that should go into? And I think there are quite a few folks in the audience that are interested in all of your views, all three of your views on the demand side. So who could be the first mover, the off-taker or the consumer, consuming sector for clean hydrogen? Also, what are some of the design considerations that should go into this? There are more coming in, but the what are some of the sorry, let me just make sure. So how the market formulation plans, what are some of the key elements in that plans to encourage demand and help ensure the market certainty? Because I think certainty, clarity, these are the themes that that have come up quite a few times. I'd love any of your thoughts. I don't know if you would like to take a pass, that's fine. But Aaron, Alex, and Matt, in that order, if you have any comments to share with the audience, that'd be great.
I mean, I probably should let the private sector people go first, but there's a lot of demand currently for the use of hydrogen and chemicals and refining. So I mean, you would certainly see those as sort of the primary people to be consuming it now. There's opportunities for hydrogen use in steel production, industrial heat, I think some sort of medium heavy duty vehicles and long-term storage and electric grid. But I think all of those are very nascent industries. And even for the existing uses, I think a good question is even with all these subsidies, how does the price of hydrogen, the subsidized price of clean hydrogen, compare with just basic steam methane reforming, where you put all the carbon dioxide into the air? And there is a green premium potentially, and how much are people willing to pay for the cleaner hydrogen in the absence of further incentives?
Yeah, just to add to that, Aaron, I think it's really worth seeing or a helpful frame, right, to see a low carbon hydrogen deployment in multiple phases here, and we're still very much at phase 0 of this, and I think with any emerging technology deployment, it's helpful to try to find what's the lowest hanging fruit, what are the easiest ways to deploy and scale, to gain learnings, to drive down cost, and also unlock economies of scale or network effects as you go. And so with low carbon hydrogen, that's really a key role for CCS enabled or blue hydrogen, is to start with those existing uses, production sources and uses of gray hydrogen today in ammonia refining and so forth. And then, that really will unlock further opportunities, especially in things like marine shipping, in things like sustainable aviation fuel, synthetic fuels, as that's emerging, in broader industrial decarbonization. Not to mention, of course, global exports. While the U.S. is focusing on the supply side carrots in many ways, we have policies on the international scale here that are focusing on the sticks or the demand side carrots, if you will, within Europe, Japan, other countries as well. And so we also see a material opportunity for the export of low carbon hydrogen globally as well. And so again, I think across all of this, at BCG, we see very much a tapestry here of different low carbon hydrogen sources, of different applications. And CCS enabled hydrogen is really a way to start to kick that off with some of the lower cost, more scalable models here for both production and use.
Now, I think it's a similar story, but I think it hit on the same issues where it's an opportunity in the hydrogen space. Clearly, carbonizing higher carbon hydrogen to lower carbon is one that's readily available now. Ammonia, and that includes domestic as well as for export, which is an extension of hydrogen. Fuel switching, where there's value associated with that fuel switching, and then mobility, maybe more nascent, but a good longer term opportunity. I do want to highlight though the value that we can create as an export. I think, as Alex pointed to, I mean, the U.S. is set up very well to be a major player in this because of the abundance of low cost natural gas, good pore space availability, good low carbon electricity opportunities. So there's a lot of things that set up the U.S. well to be a great producer of low carbon hydrogen that can be exported, globally.
Great, fantastic. I'm also starting to see a lot of questions about the emissions accounting. So the next question is also to all or any of you. So can we do the emissions accounting that are required by this policy? How will the EPA guidance on the IRA methane fee and oil gas regulations help, for example? And then another person asks, could the so-called blue hydrogen have a low enough carbon intensity to attain the $3 per kilogram of hydrogen? So there seem to be quite a bit of quite a few in the audience that are very much interested in the more accounting side of the emissions intensity question. Any taker here? Aaron, Alex? Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I am not on the ground, actually doing this, so it's a challenge, and I think we're going to have to see how EPA sets it up. I mean, I think one of the lessons we've learned sort of historically about methane emissions, that it's not just from like some pipe that's leaking all the time. There are sometimes these events which cause very large amounts of emissions that are somebody leaves a hatch open or something like that. And so how do you account for not just kind of this regular leakage, but these events into your methane leakage calculation? I think will be a big challenge, and sort of what sort of monitoring and verification EPA and presumably Treasury will require is very much an open question to me.
Alex?
Yeah, just adding to that, I think we're still relatively early days here in sorting through these complicated questions, right? On the power side, it's fundamentally a question of additionality. What are you really valuing as kind of the new or additional energy resources, renewable energy or other low carbon resources that you're bringing to bear on this? With regard to natural gas supply chains, here we're still in a relatively nascent phase of actually understanding specific supply chain emissions intensities, and that hasn't been done on a widespread basis. So I think it's whatever you look at in terms of any carbon intensity, life cycle, greenhouse gas intensity on a hydrogen molecule, one can derive a number, but what that number is really a reflection of some more fundamental analytical questions and challenges that I think transparency and an evolving means of valuing those things is important, because there's no one right, correct answer. There are very subjective questions in developing any view of GHG intensity.
Thank you, Alex. Matt?
Yeah, I would just offer that I think this is a very important one to sort through, and there are some new elements and challenges associated with particularly the methane emission part of this. But MRV in general and this space are things that we have worked before. This is not an unsolvable problem. There may be elements where we have to start with a bit more of approximations, and then as technology continues to evolve, we get more digital with the direct measurements. But these are things that are very workable. There are estimates out there now, and then we can continue. There's basis for those today we'll just continue as technology evolves, better monitoring is in place, the quality of this will just continue to go up. But we wouldn't want that to stop the recognition that there is such a thing as differentiation within the natural gas space.
And I think a lot of the same issues actually also apply to hydrogen leakage, which is, I think, a much newer issue people that haven't really dug into too much. And I don't know, I think the technology is much more new there, but you know, a lot of environmental groups have been really emphasizing the impact of potential hydrogen leakage. So I think this is going to be an emerging issue, is how to quantify that and how to take that into account in your life cycle analysis.
So we're almost at time. So I'm afraid that I need to wrap this up. But I think, you know, when you have three excellent speakers looking at this issue from three, you know, very, you know, key elements of the hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen development, I think, you know, 60 minutes just go by so quickly. And as you know, Joseph said at the beginning, I think, you know, there's a role that a US can play in this greater, you know, the bigger, you know, decarbonization, you know, context through the existing capacity we have, expertise we have. For example, CCUS, we have a leader. We also have tons of hydrocarbons. And, you know, there has been a lot of investments that are going in both from the public and private sectors. And I'm just so grateful that we're able to have a deeper dive. It's not just, you know, being, I hate to say it, this sort of stuck at the color wheel, looking at just the feedstocks, not really appreciating what are some of the trade-offs and some of the also commercial and technical and also more of a scientific considerations that have to go into as we try to really better appreciate what it is that we're trying to unlock for the greater good. So again, thank you so much, Aaron Bergman from Resources for the Future, Alex Dewar from the Boston Consulting Group, and then Matt Reeves from Exxon Mobil. And again, to all of you in the audience, thanks again for joining us, CSI's Energy Security and Climate Change Program. Stay tuned for further programming on hydrogen and many other key issues that are pressing, but also interesting to unpack. Thank you so much. Have a good day.